Emily trembled in the corner of the grand living room, clutching her children tightly to her chest. Her hands shook, her lips quivered, and every heartbeat felt like a drum of warning. The chandeliers above threw fractured light across the polished floors, reflecting in the mirrors like 1,000 eyes watching her. She whispered again, barely audible, "Please, don't harm us." Her voice was soft, almost drowned out by the distant hum of the city beyond the windows, but the fear in it could have stopped a storm. Outside, the night had settled over the mansion like a quiet observer. The wind rattled the windows in an uneven rhythm, brushing against the trees that surrounded the estate, sending shadows sliding across the walls. Emily's gaze darted to the door again, her chest tightening. She could hear faint footsteps somewhere far away, too far for comfort, too deliberate to ignore. Her mind raced, cataloging every possible outcome, every route to escape. She had tried to be calm, she had tried to reason with herself, but the weight of anticipation pressed down on her chest like an invisible hand. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the eaves, felt like it carried a message meant for her alone. Then the silence was broken. The front door swung open with a force that rattled the frames on the wall. The air seemed to shift, heavier, charged. Derek stepped inside. His presence filled the room immediately. The familiar warmth of the man she once loved was gone, replaced by something sharp, something raw. His eyes cut across the space, and for a fleeting moment, Emily's thoughts froze. She had begged for safety, whispered pleas that trembled in the air. And now, standing in the doorway, Derek's gaze swept the room, and everything she feared collided with everything she had longed for. The children huddled closer, sensing the tension, their small hands gripping her fingers with quiet desperation. Emily's heart raced faster than it ever had, yet through the terror, a strange clarity began to form. She realized in that moment that the night would not end the way anyone expected, and she understood that what came next, the choices, the actions, the confrontation, would change everything. Every glance, every movement, every breath held a consequence she could no longer avoid. Derek moved further into the room, each step deliberate, echoing faintly against the marble floor. The shadows seemed to bend around him, highlighting the intensity of his approach. Emily's mind spun, grasping at 1,000 possibilities, but the only thing certain was the arrival of his presence, the undeniable force that had returned to her home, and with it an upheaval she could not yet name. Her lips parted, barely a whisper. "Please, don't." The words hung in the air, fragile, yet heavy with desperation. And as Derek's gaze fixed on her, Emily realized this was only the beginning. The night was far from over, and the events that would follow would not be measured by comfort or mercy. They would be measured by the depth of courage, the sharp edge of decisions made under pressure, and the storm that waited to be unleashed. Emily sat on the edge of the velvet sofa, her fingers tracing the patterns of the upholstery, trying to ground herself in the calm she pretended to feel. But calm was fragile. A fragile veneer stretched over the tumult of her thoughts. She remembered the day she first met Derek, not in the grandeur of a gala or the glare of city lights, but in the quiet of a bookstore, where she had reached for the same volume he had, their fingers brushing, a spark igniting without a word. He had seemed ordinary in that moment, approachable, even gentle, a contrast to the intense world he would later reveal to her. Yet even in that first encounter, there had been a magnetism, a pull she could neither name nor resist. He had smiled, the kind of smile that carried both promise and the hint of something more, something powerful and untamed. Emily had laughed, not knowing that laughter was the first thread in a tapestry that would entangle her life in ways she could never have imagined. Their courtship was swift. Every date carried the thrill of escape, every conversation a revelation. He spoke of ambition, of visions that spanned continents, of dreams that seemed almost tangible when he described them. She listened, captivated, feeling herself swept into a current stronger than any she had known. There were dinners on rooftops, champagne under the stars, whispers of forever that filled the spaces between them. The world outside faded, leaving only their shared orbit. Emily's friends had warned her. They had spoken of caution, of the allure of wealth and charm hiding other truths. She had nodded, smiled, and told herself that love was worth the risk. And for a time, the warning seemed unnecessary. Derek was attentive, protective, intoxicating in ways she could not resist. He remembered the small details, the way she liked her tea, the songs that moved her, the books she always returned to. Each gesture built a fortress of trust around her heart, a fortress she believed was unassailable. The proposal came on a rain-soaked evening, the city lights blurring through the droplets on the windows. He knelt before her, words rehearsed, yet suffused with sincerity, and she said yes. Tears slid down her cheeks, unbidden, as the gravity of the moment pressed in. In that instant she felt secure, untouchable, certain that the path ahead was one paved with love and triumph. The wedding, when it came, was the kind of affair that filled magazines and Instagram feeds alike. A cathedral draped in white, roses cascading from every archway, a choir that made the walls themselves resonate with music. Emily remembered the feeling of stepping down the aisle, every gaze upon her, every whisper of admiration, every flash of a camera capturing what seemed like perfection. Derek's hand was warm in hers, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that promised devotion, loyalty, forever. And for a while that promise held. The first months of their life together in the sprawling estate were intoxicating. The children, when they came, filled the halls with laughter. The scent of fresh flowers and home-cooked meals mingled with the faint hum of staff, quietly managing the operations of a household far larger than most could imagine. Emily felt herself living a life she had only glimpsed in dreams, secure, radiant, respected. Yet, even in those early days, subtle threads began to weave through the perfection. A glance from Derek that lingered too long, a phone call he answered too quickly, a room he left abruptly when she approached. Emily noticed them, little by little, but her mind, trusting in the walls of love she had built, brushed them aside. She told herself it was nothing, that the foundations of their life were stronger than any tremor in the glass. And it was then, as she stood in the nursery watching her children sleep, that she felt it. The first undeniable pull of unease. A chill that moved over her skin, a tightening in her chest that spoke louder than any words could. She did not yet know what it meant. She could not yet name it. But in that quiet, luxurious home, under the soft glow of moonlight spilling through sheer curtains, Emily began to understand that even the brightest beginnings can hold shadows, and that even the safest walls can conceal fractures. If you think love and comfort can protect you, think again. Subscribe now and tell me your city. If you don't, imagine the next moment of safety you take for granted slipping away and no one being there to catch you. The life she had imagined, the storybook she had believed in, was not yet over. But the first threads of complication, the tiny fissures in the facade of perfection, were already forming. Emily could feel it. The quiet before a storm, the weight of a truth that had not yet revealed itself, pressing against the edges of her consciousness. And deep within, a question took root, insistent, unrelenting. Could she protect the life she loved, or would it all be swept away in ways she could not yet imagine? The mansion loomed around Emily like a world unto itself, walls thick with history, corridors long and echoing. Each room held its own story, each door a promise of privacy, each window a view into the night that could conceal or reveal. She had thought living here would be freedom, a reward for love and ambition, but soon she began to sense that every luxury came with an invisible cost, a price she had not yet understood. The halls were quiet when she wandered them at night, the children asleep in rooms that smelled faintly of lavender and innocence. Her heels clicked softly on polished marble floors, but the echoes felt magnified, as if the house itself were listening, observing, cataloging her movements. Emily could feel the weight of the rooms pressing down, the furniture, the art, even the chandeliers, all pieces in a puzzle she was only beginning to notice. She learned the patterns of the estate slowly, which doors locked automatically, which corridors were monitored by cameras, which staff moved silently, watching without looking. At first, she told herself it was for safety, for her family's comfort. But soon, the knowledge became a reminder. Everything she did could be observed, every step measured, every choice anticipated. Derek moved through the house with a kind of ease that unsettled her. He knew every corner, every hidden passage, every secret alcove. His footsteps were confident, his presence commanding. Emily noticed the subtle changes in his behavior, how he would sometimes glance at a room she thought empty, or speak softly into a phone that she never glimpsed the other end of. She felt a flicker of unease each time. And yet she had grown accustomed to the rhythm of the house, the silent tension that seemed to pulse with each breath she took. The children adapted quickly. They ran down the corridors, their laughter echoing in spaces too large for their small voices, and sometimes she thought their innocence shielded them from the weight she felt pressing in the corners. But even they noticed sometimes the sudden hush that fell when Derek entered, the way his presence seemed to command the air itself. Emily caught their small hands in hers, a silent reassurance that she could, perhaps, protect them, even when the mansion whispered secrets she could not yet hear. It was during these nights that Emily began to notice the first patterns of hidden danger. A door left slightly ajar where it should have been closed, a shadow moving just beyond the edge of light, whispers of voices that did not belong to the staff. She told herself it was her imagination, that stress had made her sensitive to things that were nothing. But every instinct, every small, quiet part of her mind, warned her that there was more to this house than met the eye. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, she wandered through the library. The scent of old books and polished wood filled her senses, grounding her, soothing her. And yet, as she reached for a volume, she noticed a folded envelope tucked behind a row of leather-bound volumes. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The words inside were careful, calculated, but the meaning was unmistakable. Someone had been watching, someone had been waiting, and Emily herself had become a part of a plan she did not yet fully understand. That night, she did not sleep. She sat in the nursery, listening to the quiet breaths of her children, tracing the patterns of the rain on the window pane, and thinking of Derek. She thought of the man who had once been the center of her universe, who had promised love and protection, and she wondered, with a creeping tension that made her chest tight, whether the fortress they lived in, the mansion, the wealth, the appearances, was a shield or a trap. The mansion was beautiful. It was grand. It was everything she had dreamed of. And yet, in every corner, in every locked door and hidden hallway, Emily could feel the presence of things unspoken, secrets waiting, watching, coiling around the edges of their lives. She did not yet know what form they would take, but she knew that the night would reveal them soon, and when it did, she would have to choose, to flee, to fight, or to face the storm that had quietly taken root behind the walls of their seemingly perfect home. The mansion, Emily realized, was more than a home. It was a stage. Every room, every corridor, every whisper of movement was part of a narrative she had not yet been given the script for. And as she looked out over the grounds, where the rain reflected the flicker of distant lights, she understood that the life she thought was safe, the story she believed she was living, was only the first act. The second act was waiting, and it was poised to change everything. Emily had begun to notice the little things, small fractures in what she had believed to be a perfect life. Derek moved through the house with a precision that once impressed her, now unsettling her. The way he answered calls immediately, ending them before she could even approach. The way he glanced toward rooms where she knew no one should be. The subtle shift in tone when speaking to staff, a tightness around his jaw that betrayed irritation, a glance that lingered too long. It was not that he had changed in any one glaring moment. It was the accumulation of moments, imperceptible at first, each one a hairline crack across the polished veneer of their life together. Emily tried to dismiss them, tried to anchor herself in memories of the man who had held her hand in the bookstore, who had whispered promises under city lights. But the cracks were growing, forming patterns her mind could no longer ignore. At night, when the children slept, Emily would lie awake in the expansive bedroom, listening to the hum of the mansion settling, the whisper of the wind across the estate. She began keeping a journal, not for anyone to read, but to organize her thoughts, to make sense of the unease that had taken root. Every call Derek took, every abrupt departure, every small lie she uncovered in conversation, she recorded meticulously, each entry a thread in a tapestry that increasingly looked like betrayal. One evening Emily noticed it, the glance, the hesitation, the way Derek's hand lingered over the door handle longer than necessary, as if waiting for a moment no one else could see. She began watching him, carefully, silently, trying to understand what he hid behind the carefully maintained mask, and in those quiet observations, she began to piece together patterns, connections, whispers of truth that could no longer be ignored. The children, though blissfully unaware of the larger forces at work, sensed it too. The tension in the air became a quiet presence in their small lives. Emily would catch their glances, the way they paused mid-play to watch Derek move through the room, a caution instinctively mirrored in their tiny eyes, and it reminded her of what she had to protect, not herself alone, but them. Emily's mind became a quiet machine of observation and speculation. She catalogued absences, unexplained phone messages, encounters with strangers whose names Derek never mentioned. Every note, every detail, every anomaly became a signal. And yet she did not act impulsively. She waited, she measured, she calculated, because she understood now that the cracks she saw were not merely cosmetic, they were structural. And if left unaddressed, they could collapse everything she had fought to build. She could see it in the reflection of the mirrors lining the mansion's hallways. A woman poised between fear and clarity, trembling yet calculating, caught between what she had loved and what she had begun to suspect. Each evening she would watch Derek from the stairwell, silent, unnoticed, tracing his routines, memorizing the subtle tells of the man she had married, the same man who had promised forever, now giving glimpses of a truth she did not yet fully grasp. And then came the message, the first undeniable sign that the cracks had become more than observation, that the mask had faltered. A text, brief but revealing, that made Emily's stomach tighten and her chest ache with a sense of inevitability. She read it once, twice, then set the phone down slowly, her hand trembling, not from fear alone, but from the recognition that her life, as she had known it, was no longer entirely hers. She understood with a clarity that was both frightening and necessary that the man who had once seemed infallible, unshakable, was capable of things she had not anticipated, and the realization was piercing. The foundation she had trusted, built with love, with hope, with ambition, was being undermined in ways she could not yet fully confront. Could you see Betrayal before it takes hold? Subscribe now and tell me your city. If you don't, imagine waking one morning to discover the life you trusted was being dismantled while you slept, and no one warned you. Emily's journal became a lifeline, a map of uncertainty, a catalogue of suspicions that had grown into a quiet determination. The cracks in the mask were no longer subtle. They were a guide, a warning, a tool she would need to navigate what was coming. And deep within her, beneath the layers of fear and anxiety, she felt the first stirrings of something potent. Resolve. The resolve to understand, to prepare, to protect, and, if necessary, to confront. The mansion remained grand, the walls still pristine, the luxury unbroken. Yet within those walls, the truth was quietly shifting. Every glance, every interaction, every whispered conversation carried weight Emily could not ignore. And, in the stillness of the night, as the children slept and Derek moved unseen through the shadows of the estate, Emily realized that the first signs of what was to come were already in motion, and that she had no choice but to follow them, wherever they led. The night was quiet when Emily finally allowed herself to check her phone. The house had settled into a deceptive calm, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Her fingers hovered over the screen, a hesitation she could not explain. Something told her that the messages waiting there were more than trivial, more than mundane reminders of a life she thought she knew. And then she read it. The words were brief, almost clinical, but the meaning exploded across her consciousness with the force of a hammer. Derek and another woman, someone Emily had never met, had been communicating in ways that left no room for interpretation. The details were explicit, the tone intimate, the betrayal undeniable. Her breath caught. Her hands shook. For a moment the world contracted to the small rectangle in her palm, to the words that carved a canyon between trust and truth. Emily sank to the floor, the phone trembling in her hands. She could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the slow ticking of the clock above the mantel, the distant sound of traffic outside, but nothing could penetrate the storm that raged within her. Tears came first, silently, then more violently, until she felt her body shiver with the weight of a grief she could not yet name. She had loved, she had trusted, and in one instant everything she believed in had been stripped away. But even as the sobs shook her frame, a different clarity began to emerge. Beneath the pain, beneath the betrayal, a fire began to ignite. Not of vengeance, at least not yet, but of focus, of awareness, of the unyielding need to reclaim the life she thought had been hers. Emily's mind, previously clouded by fear and confusion, sharpened. Every detail mattered. Every past event now seemed to carry hidden significance. Every glance, every whispered word from Derek, a piece of a puzzle she was now determined to solve. She thought of the children asleep upstairs, their innocence suspended in fragile dreams. She thought of herself, a woman who had built her life carefully, who had given love fully, who had believed in a future that now seemed fractured. And she realized that if she were to survive this night, if she were to protect herself and them, she could not linger in despair. The tears had to end. The plan had to begin. Emily rose slowly, setting the phone aside, her hands still trembling, but her resolve hardening. She began to retrace the interactions that had seemed innocuous before. Notes Derek had left lying around, receipts from dinners she had never been invited to, subtle mentions of meetings that did not include her. Each fragment formed a mosaic of deception she could not ignore. Her breath steadied as she understood something crucial. Knowledge was power, and she would gather it, silently, meticulously. The world might have shifted under her feet, but she would not fall. Not now, not ever. She sat at the small desk in the corner of the living room, the only sound the faint scratch of pen on paper as she began to catalog every detail, every sign, every suspicion that had previously slipped past her notice. Each entry strengthened her resolve. Each note brought her closer to understanding the extent of the betrayal, and each insight reminded her that she was no longer merely a participant in her life, she was its author. The storm of emotion subsided just enough to allow her to see clearly. The betrayal had been blatant. The trust she had placed in Derek had been violated in the most intimate ways possible. But beneath the pain, beneath the raw exposure of truth, a singular thought took root in Emily's mind. This would not be the end of her story. This would be the moment where everything changed, where she took control, where she reclaimed what had been threatened. And in that quiet, oppressive night, Emily understood the weight of one undeniable fact. The man she had built her life with, the man whose presence had once been a shield, had become the catalyst for a transformation she could not yet predict, but one she would face with deliberate intent, unflinching determination, and a clarity that betrayal had forged within her. The tears had ceased. The fear, though still present, had been channeled into purpose. Emily stood, the weight of the revelation settling into the muscles of her back, the tension in her jaw firming like steel. The night was far from over, and the challenges ahead were not yet visible. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would not be powerless. The message had shattered her world, and yet within that destruction it had given her a single, fierce gift: the clarity to act, the focus to observe, and the strength to prepare for the confrontation that would inevitably come. Emily did not speak of the message to anyone, not her friends, not the staff, not even the children, beyond what was necessary to keep them calm. She understood, instinctively, that words alone could not protect her. Knowledge alone, carefully gathered, was her only shield. And so she acted quietly, deliberately, making arrangements that would ensure she was not alone in facing what was coming. It was Janet who arrived first. A private investigator with a reputation for precision, discretion, and results, she carried herself with an air of quiet authority that Emily found reassuring. Janet's eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to see everything and miss nothing. She asked no unnecessary questions, accepted no casual answers, and when Emily handed over the details, the messages, the unexplained absences, the inconsistencies Janet immediately recognized, her calm, methodical nature became a lifeline. Janet began work that very night. Her methods were careful but thorough. She tracked movements, observed patterns, documented encounters. Each piece of information she delivered to Emily built a mosaic that had once been hidden in shadows. Emily learned where Derek had been when he claimed to be elsewhere. She discovered the dinners, the late-night meetings, the discreet conversations that had left her suspicions simmering but unconfirmed. Each revelation struck with clarity. Derek, the man who had promised devotion, had allowed another presence into the edges of their life, one that threatened to rewrite the narrative she had so carefully trusted. Emily's chest tightened with the force of recognition, the weight of truth pressing into her very bones. And yet, she no longer trembled in helplessness. The information Janet provided was a weapon, a tool that she could use to reclaim control, to prepare for the confrontation she now knew was inevitable. Emily sat at her desk, the evidence spread around her like fragments of a puzzle she was determined to solve. Photographs, receipts, phone records, all of it catalogued with meticulous care. Janet's quiet efficiency impressed upon Emily the gravity of the situation. These were not isolated incidents. This was a network of deception, carefully constructed, maintained, and executed while Emily had lived in apparent security. But the most unsettling detail was the realization that she had been completely unaware of how deeply the threads of betrayal were woven. Each new piece of evidence confirmed what her intuition had hinted at for weeks. Derek's world was not what it seemed, and her place within it had always been under scrutiny, under observation, under threat. Janet's presence was a comfort, but also a reminder. Emily could not rely on anyone else. The investigation revealed what she had feared most, but it also illuminated the path forward. Knowledge, collected carefully, provided the power she needed to act decisively, and in that quiet, tension-filled night, Emily made a decision. She would not simply survive. She would understand, anticipate, and reclaim what had been threatened. Every detail Janet uncovered was catalogued, memorized, and measured. Emily understood that timing would be crucial. One wrong move, one exposure too soon, could unravel everything she was building. The stakes were higher than ever before, and yet for the first time, Emily felt the subtle exhilaration that comes with preparation. Power, she realized, was quiet, patient, and deliberate. The mansion, so long a space of uncertainty and unease, now became a stage for strategy. Every room, every corridor, every seemingly mundane detail could be leveraged, understood, or anticipated. Emily was no longer merely reacting. She was planning, silently, invisibly, meticulously. The woman who had once been shaken to her core by a single message was now charting a course through a world she had only begun to comprehend. And as the first light of dawn crept across the estate, Emily felt a shift in herself she had not anticipated. Fear was no longer the dominant force. It had been replaced by clarity, by focus, by the unmistakable edge of someone who had seen the truth and would not allow it to control her. The next steps, she knew, would determine not just the immediate future, but the course of her entire life. Knowledge is power, but only if you act. Subscribe now and tell me your city. If you don't, imagine the next betrayal arriving silently while you remain unaware, and no one will be there to protect you. Emily leaned back in her chair. The evidence spread before her, the morning light illuminating the careful lines she had drawn. She was no longer simply a wife betrayed. She was a woman preparing for every possibility, learning the depth of deception, and silently calculating the first moves in a game that could not afford error. And deep within her, a quiet, unyielding determination began to take shape, one that would define the nights, the days, and the moments to come. Emily spent the following days in quiet intensity, moving through the mansion with a purpose that had previously been foreign to her. Each step she took, each glance she cast over documents and records, carried the weight of someone who understood that knowledge alone was not enough. Action was required. She had learned the truth, uncovered the betrayals, and now the task before her was far more deliberate. To map out a strategy, to understand the vulnerabilities of the man she had once loved, and to reclaim control over a life that had been threatened. She began in the study, where Derek's financial world unfolded before her eyes in neat, orderly chaos. Screens glowed with spreadsheets, bank statements, and digital ledgers that reflected a life built on ambition and precision. Emily traced the flow of money silently, her mind forming connections, observing weaknesses, and recognizing patterns he had assumed no one could ever detect. Every joint account, every business partner, every contract became a piece in a puzzle she would use to shift the balance. The mansion, once a symbol of comfort and security, now became a command center. Emily moved from room to room, taking notes, copying documents, cataloging passwords, and memorizing routines. Janet, the investigator, continued to feed her pieces of the puzzle: photographs of late-night meetings, receipts that contradicted Derek's explanations, financial trails that suggested unseen obligations. Each revelation fed the strategy Emily was building, a blueprint not of destruction, but of reclamation. Emily's hands trembled at first as she orchestrated the plan, but the tremor faded, replaced by the steady focus of someone who had tasted betrayal and would not allow it to dictate her life. She understood Derek's world now in ways he had assumed were invisible, and with that understanding came power. Power to anticipate, to influence, and, if necessary, to act decisively when the moment arrived. The process was meticulous. She began opening new accounts, creating legal buffers, and consulting trusted advisors who could operate discreetly on her behalf. Every action was hidden in plain sight, deliberate yet subtle, ensuring that Derek remained unaware of the shifting control slipping quietly from his hands. Emily understood that overt confrontation now would be catastrophic. Patience, observation, and precise timing would be her allies. Her nights became a cycle of quiet planning. She watched Derek from a distance, noting his habits, his routines, the small gestures that revealed assumptions about her trust. Each observation allowed her to refine her strategy, to reinforce weak points, and to anticipate the first moves he might make if he discovered the truth. Emily had been pushed to the edge, and now she was preparing a response that would leave no room for chance. It was not just the financial vulnerabilities that she mapped. Emily considered relationships, reputations, and public perceptions. Derek's network of allies, friends, and associates could be influenced or neutralized if necessary. The blueprint became a comprehensive map of opportunity, one that would allow her to reclaim autonomy, to protect herself, and to ensure that when the confrontation came, she would stand unshaken. And beneath all of it, in the quiet moments alone in the study, Emily felt a deep, fierce satisfaction forming. The fire that betrayal had sparked was now tempered into focus. Every detail she catalogued, every step she planned, brought her closer to a reckoning she had once feared, but now anticipated. The woman who had begged for protection only nights ago was now crafting a future on her own terms, armed with the clarity that only truth and preparation could bring. Power isn't given, it's claimed. Subscribe now and tell me your city. If you don't, imagine realizing too late that someone has been controlling your life while you waited, unaware, and no one could intervene. Emily closed the files slowly, letting her eyes scan the room one last time before leaving the study. Each corridor, each room, each artifact of their shared life had been examined, understood, and integrated into the blueprint. The mansion itself seemed to pulse with the tension of impending action, yet she moved through it like a shadow, careful, deliberate, invisible. The blueprint was complete, not merely a plan of retaliation, but a design for reclaiming autonomy, for asserting control, and for ensuring that the life she had built, the life she cherished, would survive the betrayal and emerge stronger than ever. Emily understood finally that power was not derived from wealth, status, or appearances. It was derived from knowledge, preparation, and the unyielding willingness to act when the moment demanded it. The mansion waited silently. The storm that had been building in the background now had a course, and Emily, who had once trembled with fear, was ready to navigate it. Emily became an actor in her own home, wearing the mask she had once removed only in private. She smiled when Derek entered the room, offered warmth and laughter at dinners, and attended the social events where the world admired them as a couple seemingly untouched by discord. Each gesture was deliberate, measured, designed to conceal the tempest that churned silently beneath the surface. To any observer, she was the devoted wife, the gracious partner, the woman whose life appeared uninterrupted and flawless. Yet every smile, every nod, every laugh was carefully calculated. Behind the eyes that shone with composure, Emily's mind worked relentlessly, cataloging, monitoring, and adjusting. She was no longer reacting to the chaos Derek had brought into her life. She was orchestrating it from within, invisible and unseen. She maintained routines that reassured him, anticipating his movements and expectations, while subtly positioning herself to strike when the time was right. Every event became an opportunity to gather information, every encounter a chance to observe, and every conversation a means of understanding the patterns Derek believed he controlled. Emily had learned the importance of patience. Invisibility, she realized, could be more powerful than confrontation. The mansion, once a space of comfort and unease, became a theater of silent strategy. Emily moved through it with grace, attending to tasks, interacting with staff, and maintaining appearances. But each action, however mundane it seemed, was part of a larger design. Documents were copied, digital records reviewed, and contingencies mapped. Derek remained oblivious, confident in the facade she presented, unaware that the quiet precision behind her eyes was reshaping the balance of power entirely. Even in moments of intimacy, Emily maintained control. She listened attentively, laughed when expected, and engaged in conversations designed to appear natural. Yet beneath each word was analysis. Each detail, each subtle slip in tone or expression was logged in the mental ledger she maintained. She understood that the greatest advantage lay in perception. Derek would see only what she allowed, while she observed everything. Her children, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents of tension and preparation, became a source of focus and motivation. Emily moved with a protective vigilance, understanding that her actions were not only about reclaiming power in her marriage, but about safeguarding the family she had built. Every step, every careful maneuver, reinforced the structure she was constructing, one that could withstand the eventual confrontation that loomed ever closer. Janet's reports continued to arrive, discreet and precise. Every meeting, every photographic detail, every anomaly in Derek's routine became another tool in Emily's hands. And as she reviewed each report, she felt a growing sense of control. The woman who had once been caught in disbelief and grief was now orchestrating events with deliberate intent, her composure masking the intensity of her preparation. The contrast between appearance and reality became a skill Emily wielded with quiet mastery. To the world she was serene, unshakable, a perfect reflection of marital devotion. Behind closed doors, however, she moved with the precision of a strategist, adjusting her moves to account for the unpredictable variables that Derek and his choices presented. And in the quiet moments before sleep, she allowed herself a rare thought. The satisfaction of knowing that the storm was hers to direct, not hers to endure passively. She had mastered the art of disguise, the power of patience, and the advantage of silent observation. Every action was now a calculated step toward the resolution she envisioned, and every smile she gave Derek carried with it a hidden weight he could not perceive. Emily's transformation was subtle, but profound. She was no longer simply a wife betrayed. She was a strategist within her own home, a silent force shaping the course of events, while Derek remained entirely unaware. And as she prepared to move deeper into the next phase of her plan, she understood that the real test had yet to come. The moment when appearances would no longer suffice, and the strength she had cultivated in secrecy would face its ultimate challenge. Emily had always suspected there was more than one adversary in Derek's world. Janet's meticulous surveillance confirmed her fears. There was someone else, someone who moved quietly through the edges of their lives, a presence that had remained unseen by all but the keenest observer. Her name was Candace, a figure whose charm masked ambition, whose smiles disguised intent. And she had Derek's attention in ways Emily had feared but not fully grasped. Candace was clever, perceptive, and bold. She believed herself untouchable, confident that her proximity to Derek gave her influence, perhaps even control. She whispered promises of admiration, flattered egos, and maneuvered in subtle ways that Emily, even in her growing vigilance, had only begun to detect. Yet despite the confidence that Candace exuded, she was unaware that her every move was being recorded, catalogued, and anticipated. Emily observed Candace's patterns through Janet's reports, the secretive meetings in dimly lit restaurants, the deliberate phone calls taken out of earshot, the brief but telling gestures that betrayed familiarity and intimacy. Each piece of evidence confirmed that Candace's ambitions were no accident, and that her intent went far beyond casual friendship. She sought to replace Emily, to infiltrate the life she had built, to take what Emily had earned. And yet, Emily did not panic. She had prepared for this. Candace was a pawn, albeit a confident one, in a game that Emily was now orchestrating with precision. Every movement, every whisper, every gesture of Candace's was mapped and considered, every action documented and leveraged. Emily had learned the most powerful strategy, to let the opponent believe they are in control while silently preparing the pieces for their eventual fall. The mansion, still gleaming with its facade of perfection, became a stage where Candace's miscalculations unfolded. Emily watched, silently, noting the small moments where arrogance betrayed vulnerability, a touch of hesitation, a glance too long, a gesture misaligned with intent. These were the details that would define the path forward. Candace had underestimated Emily, assuming grief or anger would leave her incapacitated, but Emily's calm, her measured patience, masked the storm she had cultivated, a storm that would strike with precision when the time was right. The contrast between them was stark. Candace, vibrant, audacious, believing herself on the verge of victory. Emily, poised, quiet, invisible, yet omnipresent in every observation, every calculation, every preparation. The tension was electric, invisible to anyone outside their orbit, yet suffocating in its intensity. Each encounter became a test, each conversation a thread in the web Emily was weaving. And in the shadows, Emily allowed herself a small, quiet thought. Candace was dangerous only to those unprepared. Emily was prepared. Every move she made, every smile she offered Derek, every gesture of domestic perfection was a calculated response. Candace thought she was advancing, but Emily knew the true power lay in patience, in information, in the meticulous orchestration of events that Candace could never anticipate. Janet's reports continued to arrive, each one confirming the depth of Candace's ambition, but also revealing cracks in her confidence, moments where pride overshadowed caution and overreach threatened exposure. Emily catalogued every detail. She understood that every seemingly insignificant misstep by Candace was an opportunity, a foothold in a plan that had already begun to take shape. The stakes were higher than ever. Candace was bold, ambitious, and unaware of the web tightening around her. Emily, once a woman overwhelmed by grief and betrayal, was now the quiet architect of control. She could see every detail, anticipate every move, and prepare the decisive moments that would ensure victory. Emily leaned back in the quiet of her study, the mansion around her alive with subtle movements and whispered intentions. Candace believed she was maneuvering freely, but every step was anticipated, catalogued, and integrated into Emily's growing strategy. The shadows that Candace hid within were now the same shadows Emily controlled. And in that moment, Emily understood the magnitude of her transformation. She had moved from victim to strategist, from observer to orchestrator, the perfect wife, the calm partner, the woman who smiled in public. All of it was now a carefully constructed armor. And behind it, the storm of preparation and silent power waited for the exact moment to strike. The anniversary party had arrived, shimmering like a jewel in the city's night. Lights twinkled from the chandeliers, reflecting off polished floors and crystal glasses. The soft hum of music drifted through the hall, a gentle background to what was about to unfold. Guests arrived in clusters, dressed in elegance, their laughter and chatter forming a perfect illusion of celebration. To them, it was a night of joy, of admiration, of unity. But Emily knew the reality beneath the glitter. Derek entered with confidence, arm in arm with Candace. Her smile was radiant, assured. She had believed herself untouchable, thinking that Emily would remain silent, unreactive, and powerless in the face of public exposure. The room's whispers began almost immediately, a murmur of curiosity and judgment. Emily, however, remained composed. Her gown, flawless, her posture elegant, her gaze calm yet unyielding. She had mastered the art of invisibility, and tonight invisibility would become power. Every movement was deliberate, every glance, every toast, every interaction Emily made was calculated to maintain appearances while observing, analyzing, and controlling the flow of the evening. Derek believed he had orchestrated the night, that his choice to bring Candace would unsettle her, that public humiliation would weaken her resolve. He had underestimated her. Emily raised her glass in quiet acknowledgement of the guests around her, the faintest smile playing at her lips. It was a gesture of civility, of perfection, of the calm in a storm that none could see. And as she did, she caught Candace's glance across the room. The other woman's confidence faltered ever so slightly, a micro-expression that Emily catalogued instantly. One small crack, one tiny hesitation, enough to remind her that even the boldest rivals had weaknesses. The guests danced, toasted, and mingled, oblivious to the tension coiled beneath the surface. Emily's mind, however, moved swiftly. Every whisper, every glance, every laugh became a signal, a detail in a tapestry of control she had woven silently over weeks. She noticed Derek's subtle attempts to assert dominance, the way he sought to draw attention to his perceived victory, the proud way he lingered near Candace as if she were proof of triumph. And yet, each movement only confirmed the precision of Emily's preparation. Emily's composure became her weapon. Guests began to whisper among themselves, sensing an undercurrent of tension, sensing the contrast between Derek's confidence and the calm, controlled aura Emily exuded. The room, so alive with celebration, had begun to tilt subtly in her favor. She had learned that power was often quiet, invisible, and patient, and tonight her quiet mastery would speak louder than any confrontation could. Janet's final report arrived discreetly in Emily's hand, a small note tucked into her clutch. It confirmed the exact moments Candace had planned to influence, the subtle interactions Derek believed were unnoticed, and the opportunities Emily now had to assert control. Every detail she had anticipated, every preparation she had made, aligned perfectly with the flow of the evening. The night was no longer merely a party, it was the stage for the reckoning she had silently orchestrated. And as the clock approached the moment of Derek's greatest overconfidence, Emily allowed herself the smallest imperceptible smile. The whispers, the glances, the illusions of victory held by Derek and Candace, they were all about to unravel in ways neither could predict. What would you do if the world watched betrayal unfold right before your eyes? Subscribe now and tell me your city. If you don't, imagine everyone witnessing the moment your life is dismantled, and no one intervenes. Emily lifted her glass once more, a gesture of grace and calm. The party continued, but beneath the surface, the truth she had prepared for was ready to emerge. Every calculated step, every silent observation, every patient move had led to this night. And when the moment came, she would no longer be the woman betrayed. She would be the woman in control, commanding the attention and respect that had always been hers to claim. The anniversary party, a dazzling spectacle of wealth and social expectation, had become her theater. And Emily, poised and unwavering, knew that the coming hours would reveal the true extent of the power she had quietly accumulated. The party had ended, the guests long gone, leaving behind the soft glow of fading chandeliers and the subtle scent of champagne and roses. The mansion was silent, yet Emily's mind raced with clarity and purpose. The night had been executed perfectly, every gesture, every glance, every whisper of tension observed and catalogued. But now came the moment she had prepared for, the execution of the plan that had taken weeks of meticulous preparation. She moved through the house quietly, her steps deliberate, precise. The children were asleep upstairs, their rooms untouched by the turbulence of the evening. Derek, confident in the success of his night, had retired to his study, likely unaware that the foundation beneath his control was already shifting. Emily's hands, steady and purposeful, began the first moves she had charted in the blueprint of her revenge. The screens glowed with the digital evidence she had gathered: bank accounts, business contracts, legal documents. Every transaction, every asset, every hidden vulnerability was within reach. Emily navigated the networks carefully, verifying access, confirming transfers, and ensuring that every action would remain invisible until the consequences could no longer be ignored. She worked with deliberate precision, every click a step toward reclaiming what had been threatened, every signature a quiet assertion of power. Janet had prepared contingency measures, ensuring that Emily's moves were secure, untraceable, and irrevocable once executed. Every legal framework was in place, every loophole accounted for. Emily's calm demeanor belied the storm of activity she conducted in the shadows of the mansion. The woman who had once trembled at a single message now orchestrated the collapse of a carefully constructed illusion. As the minutes passed, transactions were verified, documents executed, and assets secured. Emily's gaze was unwavering, her mind fully engaged in the orchestration of consequences. Derek believed himself triumphant, yet he remained blissfully unaware that every confidence, every assumption, every sense of control had been dismantled under the cloak of patience and calculation. Even the smallest details were considered. Emily ensured that every record, every communication, every trace of the changes she initiated would align seamlessly, leaving Derek with only the sudden realization of loss and exposure. Candace, whose ambitions had been a silent irritation throughout, would witness the unraveling of the narrative she believed she controlled. The timing, the execution, the precision, it was all designed to maximize clarity of consequence without warning. And as the first light of dawn approached, Emily allowed herself a single breath, slow and steady. The night's work was nearly complete. The mansion, once a backdrop to deception and betrayal, had become a stage where Emily's quiet mastery would reveal itself fully. Every asset secured, every legal maneuver executed, every digital footprint confirmed. By sunrise, the balance of power would have shifted irreversibly. Emily finally set her hands aside, the hum of machines and notifications filling the room, each ping a confirmation of the plan's success. Her heart, steady and resolute, reflected the confidence she had cultivated. She was no longer a woman reacting to betrayal. She was the orchestrator of consequences, the silent architect of a reckoning long overdue. The mansion remained quiet, but the foundations of Derek's carefully constructed life were already shifting. And Emily, calm and composed, knew that the morning would bring clarity not just to her, but to the man who had underestimated her resolve. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, soft at first, deceptive in its calm. The mansion, once a place of celebration and carefully orchestrated appearances, now held an almost unbearable stillness. Emily sat quietly at the breakfast table, her posture perfect, her expression composed, a mask of serenity that belied the storm she had orchestrated the night before. The quiet hum of the city outside only amplified the tension within these walls. Derek awoke to an unfamiliar sensation, a creeping unease that prickled at the edges of his confidence. At first he attributed it to fatigue, the aftermath of last night's festivities. But as he reached for his phone, scanning notifications, checking emails, a creeping horror settled in. Bank alerts, legal confirmations, messages he had never expected to see. Everything had changed. Every asset, every account, every digital trace he relied on was either frozen or transferred. His empire, painstakingly built over years, began to crumble before his eyes. He moved through the house, disbelief etched across his face. His phone buzzed relentlessly, each notification a hammer striking the illusion of control he had believed unshakable. He called offices, partners, and associates, only to be met with confusion, resistance, and the cold reality that the control he had taken for granted was gone. Candace, once brimming with audacity, realized in horror that her proximity to power had been an illusion, a mirage crafted by Emily's meticulous planning. Emily watched from the safety of her calm, the faintest smile on her lips, knowing that every detail had unfolded precisely as she had orchestrated. Derek's frustration escalated, his confident facade cracking, revealing the man who had believed he could manipulate, deceive, and dominate without consequence. The man who had underestimated her now faced the weight of her preparation, the silent power she had cultivated in secrecy. The children remained blissfully unaware upstairs, their innocence a stark contrast to the chaos below. Emily, composed and unwavering, ensured that the house remained orderly, her demeanor unshakable. Derek screamed into the silence, calling for explanations, accusing, demanding. Yet every attempt to regain control was met with the undeniable reality of his loss. Every move he made revealed the depth of Emily's foresight, the precision of her plan, and the inevitability of her triumph. Candace, recognizing the extent of the miscalculation, left without a word, her ambitions dissolved in the quiet devastation Emily had orchestrated. Derek's eyes, once confident and assured, now reflected fear, disbelief, and the painful comprehension of betrayal's consequences. The man who had once appeared invincible now faced a reality he had never anticipated, a lesson in power, patience, and precision. And in the quiet aftermath, Emily finally allowed herself a deep breath. The storm of the previous weeks, the chaos of betrayal, and the meticulous orchestration of consequences had culminated in this moment. She had not only protected herself, but had reclaimed the life, the agency, and the control that had been threatened. Emily stood by the window, sunlight warming her face, the quiet of the morning a stark contrast to the chaos that had just unfolded. She understood, with absolute clarity, that this was not merely revenge, it was reclamation. She had been underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. Now she was unshakable, untouchable, and finally free. The morning had revealed the truth. Derek had learned the weight of betrayal. Emily had discovered the freedom it could bring, and in that realization, she felt something she had not in weeks, a quiet, unyielding peace, born from the mastery of circumstance, the anticipation of action, and the precision of her resolve. 3 months had passed. The mansion had quieted, its halls no longer echoing with tension or whispered plots. Emily moved through her life with a calm authority that few could comprehend. The divorce had been finalized, clean, precise, and entirely on her terms. Derek had attempted protests, negotiations, pleas, but every effort fell flat. The balance had shifted irreversibly, and Emily had ensured that every detail of her victory was secured, unassailable, undeniable. Her mornings were no longer shadowed by doubt or vigilance. She sipped coffee on her penthouse balcony, the city sprawling below, the sunlight illuminating the empire she had quietly built. Business contracts, investments, and partnerships, all solid, all under her control. The weight of betrayal, once heavy and suffocating, had transformed into freedom, clarity, and purpose. She thought of Derek only briefly, and even then, without anger or regret. He had learned, far too late, the lesson she had internalized through heartbreak, planning, and quiet execution. Underestimating someone who has nothing left to lose is the gravest mistake of all. Candace's shadow had disappeared, leaving only the echo of ambition thwarted by precision, patience, and strategy. Emily's reflection in the window showed a woman transformed, not just by circumstance but by choice. Strength, resilience, and independence radiated from her presence. She had been the victim, the overlooked, the underestimated. Now she was sovereign, fully in command of her life, her decisions, and her future. The final encounter with Derek was brief. He appeared at the penthouse entrance, his expression a mixture of disbelief, regret, and unspoken apology. Emily acknowledged him with a calm nod, her eyes steady, her voice even and measured. He attempted words, attempts to negotiate or reclaim a fragment of control, but she merely turned away, the quiet confidence in her step echoing louder than any confrontation could. She thought betrayal destroyed me, Derek might have reflected, but he was wrong. Betrayal had not destroyed her, it had liberated her, honed her focus, and revealed a power she had only begun to understand. Emily had reclaimed her life, reshaped her world, and ensured that her path forward was unchallenged, untethered, and unassailable. Her children thrived, unaware of the silent battles waged on their behalf. Friends admired her calm strength, unaware of the meticulous strategy that had safeguarded their family's future. And Emily herself. She savored the quiet joy of freedom, the subtle thrill of victory, and the unshakable knowledge that she would never again allow deception to dictate the course of her life. The past was behind her, the present secure, and the future hers to command. Every betrayal had become a lesson, every challenge a catalyst, and every silent struggle a foundation for her sovereignty. Emily, once a woman at the mercy of others' ambition, was now fully and unapologetically in control. Now it's your turn. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. If you don't, then tell me why. Silence is just another way of surrendering, and I'll know who gave up. Don't wait for betrayal to teach you what you could have controlled all along. Emily turned from the window, her reflection merging with the bright morning light. The world was hers, fully, irrevocably, and she had claimed it with patience, precision, and unwavering resolve. The story of betrayal had ended, but the story of her strength, freedom, and sovereignty had only just begun.